For a few of you out there, for just a few of you in the audience, this video is providing advice that is going to influence decisions you make in the immediate future, and that's going to shape your life for years and decades to come. And then there are the rest of you who are watching this for just the mildly amusing quality of knowing some more details about my personal life and experience, living and working in Asia, so on and so forth. I love you people, don't get me wrong, but I have to be mindful about both audiences. I'm here talking about the really important reasons why you should not choose to learn Chinese in Taiwan, the Republic of China. This is something I've thought about for many, many years. It's something I've experienced going back to about the year 2002 or 2003 dealing with. I've lived in Taiwan at many different times in my life, and I have experiences with both institutional learning and, shall we say, extracurricular or independent learning. I have experience linking me to innumerable universities within Taiwan, including and especially small Buddhist universities, the English-teaching universities, the elite universities, the humble universities. It's not worth talking about my background. I'm someone who has been in and out of Taiwan since maybe 2003. This is now 2019. I don't even want to add up how many years I've been on the island. Maybe it adds up to 2 years during that time. I don't know. But it is a few months here, a few months there. And I'm someone who's been a student of Chinese in several different institutions. Right? When I was a child, when my first language, my only language was English, and yet I was still in the process of learning English, I would ask my father questions such as, the word infantry, it looks a lot like the word infant. Are they related? Did they used to have the same meaning? Is there some reason why the word infantry in the military is spelled the same way as infant? And even though my father spoke English as his first language, and even though my father considered himself a highly educated and erudite man, he was made very uncomfortable by this kind of question. I asked questions about the English language from age 3 that made my parents feel uncomfortable, ill-educated, stupid, and unsure what to say. On the island of Taiwan, the multicultural situation that people are living in is so awkward, is so difficult to negotiate, that people are confronting exactly this kind of consternation all the time when you ask the simplest questions imaginable, even about how a word is pronounced, how a word is written, what a word means. The most self-confident people in Taiwan about language are the ones who will come out and say straight to your face that they don't speak Chinese at all. They speak this other language, Hokkien, or they speak this other language, Hakka. It's a minority of people who embrace that identity. The vast majority of people in Taiwan instead live in a perpetual gray area of self-doubt and self-contradiction where they speak, read, write, and understand an uncertain mixture of Beijing Standard Chinese, Beijing Standard as adapted, preserved, and promulgated by the government of Taiwan, not as propounded by the Communist government of China, naturally, which, by the way, has a bunch of cute and memorable little features that separate it from Standard Chinese. As spoken in Beijing, the word for garbage can is completely different. In Taiwan, they have 2 different verbs, one of which means to look at a book, and one of which means to read a book, whereas in Communist China, they just have one verb for both of those functions. There are a bunch of cute little oddities like that we need not go into in this video. What I'm trying to get at instead is the really deep level of discomfort that people have, including university-educated people, including members of the social elite, in answering and dealing with the most basic questions of what Chinese is and what is the correct way to communicate in the language. This will extend to interactions you have with people on Facebook, where you write something in 100% correct textbook Chinese, and they find it incomprehensible, and they can't explain to you why. Where they say to you, no, we don't say that in Chinese that way, or we don't write that in Chinese that way. And you might say back to them, but that's exactly how my teacher at the university taught me to say it. That's exactly how my textbook says to write it. You might even be able to hold up the textbook. All right? The entire population of Taiwan, from the most elite university-educated person to the high school dropout who has a job in construction. They live in a constant state of uncertainty, consternation, and self-contradiction with this. It's very difficult for them to communicate to their own children what ideal they ought to aspire to in Chinese. What is the meaning of correct pronunciation in Chinese? And they muddle by, unified by this incredibly complex and perplexing written language that gives it the veneer of being one language when really it's at least 3 or 4 just within the tiny island of Taiwan. Each language is at the other's throats. I could tell innumerable anecdotes, but what I want to emphasize here is the vast majority of people here in Taiwan will not come out and say to you that they're speaking Hokkien. Hokkien is also known as Minnan-yu. It's also known as Tai-yu, just meaning the language of Taiwan, but there are other languages of Taiwan, and it's not the indigenous language of Taiwan. That's a whole other story, talking about the indigenous peoples. It's just a different Chinese language. I was once going up the staircase that leads to my apartment, and that particular apartment in Taiwan. It's a long, exhausting staircase to get up, and the woman living a few doors down from me opened the door and just starts kind of yelling at me in her version of Chinese. And I mean, it seemed to be something important. So I got out my dictionary and I was saying, okay, I was slowly repeating back to her what she was saying to me. So, okay, there's one word here I don't recognize at all, right? And she was saying this word for landlord. It was completely different. It's the Minnan word for landlord, or it's the Hokkien word. I don't think she was speaking Hakka. I'm just guessing from context here. And writing, using my finger in my cellular phone dictionary, I was able to figure out what word she meant and what the meaning was. And it was something like, the landlord is having a problem with the pump. You have to tell the person you're renting your apartment from. Something along those lines that I communicated to my own landlord, I guess, whatever you want to say. We were subletting. That woman, from her perspective, when she was speaking, she was saying the same word that I looked up in the dictionary that had a completely different phonetic value. These people watch the news with Hokkien being spoken and subtitles in standard Chinese. The extent to which these languages, multiple mutually incompatible languages, are overlapping, intertwined, and mutually confusing, it's something that's very, very difficult for any European to understand. If you grew up with an Italian grandfather or an Italian uncle who couldn't really speak English properly, he was nevertheless aware of when he was speaking Italian, when he was speaking English, and when he was kind of mixing the two languages together. Because maybe, he knew a few words in the sentence, but then had to lapse into Italian because he wasn't sure what the English language word for something that was, okay? The entire island of Taiwan is inhabited by people who have no idea when they are speaking Chinese properly and when they are not. And as I said much earlier in this video, the only people who feel self-confident are the people who just openly say they don't speak Chinese and who demand to speak to you in Tai-yu, in Minnan-yu, in Hokkien, or in Hakka. And in all my experience, in all my years in Taiwan, that has happened to me once. Once a woman said to me, expectedly, oh, well, don't you speak Hokkien? Don't you speak Tai-yu? And I said back to her, no, I studied Chinese in a university. Therefore, I speak Beijing Hua. I speak the dialect of Beijing, which is the textbook standard dialect, more or less. We could now insert a lengthy diatribe about how the textbook standard language is not really the same as the Beijing dialect. Okay, so these are really deep cultural reasons that go back at least 300 years in Taiwan. And the conquest of Taiwan by the Japanese only made it worse. There were several generations in Taiwan that grew up with Japanese as their language of higher learning and scholarship, who went to university. I've read autobiographies from these people. Reading, writing, thinking, and dreaming in Japanese. That was the level of Japanese, immersion if you wanted to be an elite person in Taiwan. And yet you might think, oh, well, that's only people who, I don't know, went to university to study the humanities. No. For example, anyone employed in the railway administration, they all had to be fluent in Japanese. Anyone doing this kind of engineering job, science jobs, so on, those were all Japanese language careers that had university education, some kind of college, technical college education attached to them. Taiwan really was part of the Japanese Empire, and it's been politically convenient to kind of forget about that or sweep that under the rug. I think I'm living in one of the only places where people are open about it. It's kind of another story where people actually openly celebrate their Japaneseness in my particular small town in Taiwan right now. I think there are probably a few places. Go to Taroko Gorge. You can see some people who still fly the Japanese imperial flag, and you can ask them what that means to them politically, okay? So even like during the 19th and 20th centuries, when Taiwan might have had some of the same unifying influences that, say, even Shanghai went through, Shanghai, very different, strange history, obviously, Taiwan was not even incorporated into the standard Chinese linguistic sphere to that same extent that Shanghai was in. And I would also say, do not go to Shanghai to learn Chinese. That's really an incredible uphill struggle to deal with the difference between Shanghai dialect and standard Chinese. But again, those people will be less screwed up about it than the population of Taiwan. Okay? There are a couple of other cultural issues here that cut deep I want to mention. So I have experience as a student of Chinese. I have experience as a teacher of many languages, including English. Recently, I was teaching my own girlfriend Chinese. I was her first. My girlfriend is white American. She wasn't born or raised with any Asian language. And I have experience dealing with these issues from various perspectives. Okay? Taiwan had a reputation as the world's greatest place to learn Chinese in the 1970s, when they had no competition, when mainland China was a communist nightmare of brutal repression, mass murder by state force, people being thrown into the gulag, and mass starvation. Okay? That was the period of time in which Taiwan had this reputation as a fantastic place to learn Chinese. And some of that reputation still circulates today. Some of your university professors, if you're watching this, they may tell you, oh no, Taiwan's this inspiring place. The people who taught Chinese to Westerners, to Americans, starting with the American military, that's how it started, during that period, they were themselves refugees escaping from communist China. They weren't really Taiwanese people. And the Taiwanese themselves have a whole political discourse and all these terms for that. They were newcomers, etc., etc. Okay? So that's also part of the fabric of Taiwanese politics and society. Okay? And that period of time is over. Those teachers are now either deceased or incredibly elderly, and they were replaced with a new generation with very different attitudes and very different problems in life. Now, one of the other dramatic changes is the amount that they were paid. Yes, I looked up formal peer-reviewed research. I think one of them was a government report also. It was a Taiwanese government inquiry into why the quality of language education was going down and what the issues were in this area of language education. And that report pointed out, look, back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, this was a really high-paid job. It was really prestigious to be a Taiwanese person teaching white foreigners. And today, it's not. Today, it's a job that pays so little that, especially in Taipei, people can barely survive or can't survive at all. If you're at a rural university in the countryside or something, because the rent is lower, the same rate of pay gives them a better quality of life, but it's tough to get by. So the prestige is gone, the pay is lower, the golden generation of artists and intellectuals who fled from communism to Taiwan and brought all this energy and sense of mission and purpose, and who, many of them during World War II, were teaching Chinese to American soldiers, maybe in some cases to British soldiers or what have you, and then put all that energy. And again, that would have been an inspiring time. They were poor. It was post-war squalor, but they were building new universities where before there were only rice fields. You can imagine it was probably a very inspiring time to be working your way up from the rice fields and the squalor and destruction of World War II, and everyone was afraid of the atom bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not so far away. That was a unique moment in the world's history, and you might have thought, if you were alive then, that in the 1970s it was just getting rolling and it would only get better and better from there. And you're wrong. In the 1970s, that was probably at its apogee. And then after that, it only got worse and worse. Who are the people who become Chinese language teachers today, or even English language teachers in Taiwan today? If you're talking about Taiwanese people who do it, okay? They are predominantly women who wanted to get married, have a family, and raise children, and who have been stuck taking care of other people's children and are deeply frustrated, deeply unhappy with their lives because they never got married and had kids. That's what I've encountered again and again and again. And that's include women I've known who were just school teachers, English teachers. It's included women I've known who became Buddhist monks and who became professors in Buddhist universities. Many of the female professors. It is a stereotype. It is. But it's a stereotype I have to warn you about. There's an incredible bitterness. Look, man, teaching a language takes love. All right? It's like doing speech pathology, speech therapy, where you talk to someone who has a lisp. They can't get the word right, and you help them again and again until they get it. And then maybe they go away on vacation for 2 weeks, and they come back, and they're making the same mistake again. You have to really be willing to help someone pronounce the difference between s and sh and s, whatever example you want to use. And of course, the problem in Taiwan is none of the Taiwanese people can pronounce those three distinctly. It's a great example. I didn't think of it in advance. But none of them can pronounce the difference between the Chinese number 10 and the Chinese number 4. All right, this is a really simple phonetic distinction that the Taiwanese don't have in their own language because it's not their own language, right? This is the problem nobody wants to admit to you, right? It takes a lot of love to sit down with a student and say, oh, no, you're not quite pronouncing run right. You're not pronouncing s right. And, that's just simple one-syllable pronunciation. Oh, no, I see what you were trying to do in structuring this sentence, but let me help you. This is how to do it right. This is how to make it. It takes a certain amount of love. And the teachers you deal with in Taiwan, whether or not it's because specifically in their case, they're women who wish they had kids and never managed to. They wanted to start a family and instead got trapped in this low-pay, not prestigious, dead-end job. Whatever the story. It's not always that. It's a different story in a different case. I've got to tell you something. Today, in 2019, 2020, in Taiwan, they do not have the love. They do not have what it takes emotionally, intellectually, or in terms of language or cultural background to be good language teachers in the Chinese language. And that is why, long story short, you should not enroll in studying Chinese in Taiwan. Is there an easy alternative? No. Going to Beijing to live under a communist dictatorship in an unbelievably polluted, crowded hellhole, it's not that appealing. Going to Singapore, going to Hong Kong might be even worse. I think the challenge we're facing in 2019 is precisely to build up institutions that can really teach Chinese in London, New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, Vancouver, Berlin, Paris. I think the whole Western world needs Chinese teaching institutes in all of its major cities. Because right now, there is no good deal anywhere in Asia, anywhere in China, Taiwan, Japan, anywhere in the Eastern world.